Well, I would like to welcome you tonight. This is our third class. We're under the section called Law and Grace, and we're in our third class. And tonight we're going to look at God's initial revelation of Himself. Let me remind you to go on the website and to download the PDF so that you can follow along even as we do this teaching. I'd like to welcome those of you that are here with me in the classroom. So let's pull out our handouts and let's begin our study of God's initial revelation of Himself. We're going to begin with a paragraph that we have used in the Farmer 2 classes, so let me read that again. It says, "The God of Scripture, as sovereign and absolute Lord, changes not. Therefore, His grace and His law, which remain the same in every age, continually testify to God's immutable character and to the course of man's activity. The strength of man is in the absoluteness of his God." So our premise is that in every covenant, in every phase, we have both grace and law, and we're looking at those concepts and seeing how they blend together. According here to your handout, I have said that the opening chapters of Genesis gives us an initial revelation of God. Now, we talked about initial revelation of man and an initial revelation of the law. Tonight we're going to talk about this initial revelation of God. And if you'll remember, the scripture says, "In the beginning God created." So that's those opening words. And I was thinking today about that initial revelation, the fact that in the beginning God created what is called His incommunicable attributes are presented to us, albeit in just an initial revelation, and as the scripture unfolds we get to know more about God. But right from the beginning you can see that God is eternal, because there wasn't anything created but God was present. So we have that aspect of His being, that He is an eternal God. Sometimes it's said the self-existent one. You've probably heard that phrase. And it also testifies to His independent existence, meaning there was no cause for God to exist. He is the self-existing one, and everything else came into being because He created it. So He's causative of everything else, but nothing caused His existence. Also, we see He's omnipotent. I mean, He's so powerful He can make it all. And even in that, He's infinite. There's no limit to His power. There's no limit to His being. There's no limit to His knowledge. There's no limit to the space that He dwells in. He's everywhere present at all times, and He knows everything that needs to be known. So this infinity, this infinite part of God is revealed also as we see Him there in the beginning. And then, according to His knowledge, He may know everything, but to us He's incomprehensible. We can't comprehend. We get some revelation of what He can do, but we can't comprehend all of His being, and He's immutable. He never changes, and that's the premise of our topic tonight. So we get this initial revelation of God even as we see Him as the transcendent creator. And as a transcendent creator, God gives purpose and meaning to every aspect of His creation. So that idea is that the very first thing that we meet about God, we meet Him as in His person. And so theologically, the concept is that the ontological aspect precedes the teleological aspect. And now everybody's going, what did she say? Well, ontology is the study of the being of God. So when we're first presented with God, in the beginning God, so we meet Him first, and then it says He created. So teleology is the study of design or purpose toward an end. So we see the being of God precedes the act of God, if you can hear what I mean by that. And in essence, a lot of the arguments are settled once we understand that being precedes doing. Some of you may have heard that philosophy before. And we can do and do and do and never quite discover who we are, but when we discover who we are, then our doing becomes easier. Well, God is presented first in His being, and then from His being we see His purposes. So He's presented to us. These are great big chunks, great big concepts of doctrine, and my purpose here tonight is not to expound on the full nature of God's being, just to point out that these things are, at least in seed form, presented to us right here in this opening portion of Genesis, and we can focus on the fact that God has all of these transcendent qualities. And then, so as this creator now, he's going to move into this condition, here, you can turn back to your handout here, and I say into this condition of without form and void. That's what the Bible tells us there in Genesis 1:2. The earth was without form and void. God came forth into that condition, and he brought forth structure. That is, he put form to it, and then he filled that form with all sorts of life. And as you look at those first 3 days of creation, you can see how in each one of those first 3 days, he created the farm, and then the second set of 3 days, days 5, 6, and 7, kind of parallel those first 3 days in that every farm that he created, then he filled it. So by the time he finishes, and at the end of 6 days, he's taken care of the formlessness, and he's taken care of the void, and he's filled it all with his power. And as he did that, as he's the creator of this, he gives purpose and meaning to everything that he creates. And everything he creates is designed so that it will serve its purpose. So God says, I want a bird that will fly. That's my purpose. So he designs the bird so it has hollow bones, and it has wings, so it's aerodynamic. Just amazing design God put in everything. And the design of each creation, this is a point I want us to really concentrate on. It testifies to the laws or principles which God bound into the created order. I mean, everything, the design of everything works regularly and works systematically and works by laws that he has woven into it. I thought I'd point out to you a book that I have read several times, and every now and then, if I feel like my faith is waning in any way, I pull this book out, because it's called More Than Meets the Eye. It's a book by a Dr. Richard Swinson, and he opens up for us God's grand design in all of the created order. He says, or this bio on the back says, Dr. Swinson asserts that, in fact, all of nature reveals a God who consistently nurtures and sustains his creations in ways that we can scarcely comprehend. Drawing on his background in medicine and natural science, he examines the wonders of creation and explains how they reveal a majestic God whose mastery of detail is evident everywhere, from the breathtaking complexity of living cells to the awesome grandeur of the cosmos. So he goes in how the cell is designed and how the DNA molecule, and if you don't get too bogged down with the science, although he's very articulate and presents it in a way that can be understood, you find yourself in worship saying, God, how you thought your way through every little design and wove it into all of your creation. So this Creator God, he had a purpose. Nobody advised him. Just out of his own will, he designed a purpose. And then after he set the purpose, he put the structure so that the structure would serve the purpose. And for our intents and purposes, we want to remember that in that structure, it's filled with all the laws that keep the structure and keep the life contained. All right, so another thing that we can find out about God as we look at this initial revelation is when he says, thou shalt not, which is what he said to Adam and Eve about the tree, it reveals that God claims the position of lawgiver. And we can take an example from everyday life to kind of better understand that. You know that the designer or the creator of any invention defines the laws by which the innovation functions. That's why we get manuals, because somebody has created something and then they think, well, they better tell us that why and how are the laws by which that particular item would function. And then actually though, the invention, anybody's invention, is only as successful as its ability to comply with the natural law that governs all creation. So I'm guilty. I've made a cake and forgotten the baking soda and had a failure, which is better than building a whole building and forgetting the foundation, I guess, right? So we have to live by those basic laws that are woven into creation, and then our inventions have the ability to be successful. And by natural law, I mean the law of nature. Even our forefathers, the forefathers of our Constitution, use that term natural law, and they said it this way: the laws of nature and of nature's God. In other words, they were saying this great God who created everything put laws in all of nature, and you can trust that those laws are steadfast and sure, and you can base your designs and your inventions on those natural laws. So not only are physical laws bound to the created order, but moral laws, spiritual laws, and ethics are intrinsically woven into this natural order, into natural law. I guess maybe we should take just a minute to say that the unseen, the eternal, the spiritual realm, it has precedence over this natural realm. I mean, it was here first. And then out of eternity, God stepped into time and began to make time and make the physical world. So the unseen world, I mean, that's where Lucifer fell. And that's where those laws of morality and eternal truth and were applied against him, and that's where the angels turn around and respond, holy, 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 as they're commenting on the perfection of God and the perfection of everything that he has done. So we live in a physical world, but just intrinsically woven into the laws of the physical world are also all the moral and spiritual laws. So as we move along, we see that the third thing that is revealed to us about God's being there in that initial revelation in Genesis is that God's position as judge is revealed in both his declaration of good upon the works of his hand, and also in his dealings with the first couple and with the serpent. So remember how God made everything, and then he'd come back and he'd look at it and he'd say, it's good. Well, what was God saying? The proclamation of good that the judge placed upon his works declared that the perfect will of God, the perfect will of himself, the flawless design of the Creator, and the inerrant standard of eternal truth were all met. And when everything met the standard and met the pattern, God pronounced the blessing upon it. So he overlaid the pattern of his purposes, looked at what he created, he said, oh, perfect match, and he announced that his creation matched his will. It was good. Also, the decrees that the judge placed upon Adam, Eve, and the serpent not only revealed that their words and their works missed the mark of perfection, and by the way, let me remind you that in the New Testament, in the Greek, the word for sin is hamartia, and it is actually defined as missing the mark. So in the beginning, they missed that mark of perfection, but the judge had the power to apply negative sanctions. So God had said to them, in the day you eat thereof, here's the sanction that will be attached. And if you remember, the enemy came along and said, no, you can do what you want, and your deeds will have no consequences. Well, he was wrong, God was right, and God stepped in not only to judge works, but to judge the deeds. So the final thing we want to talk about today is there in the garden, also God's nature of truth and mercy can be seen in his redemptive dealings with fallen man. By truth, I mean that God upheld his eternal truth and applied truth as the standard of his judgment. I mean, he could have said, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. I want to pull that back because I don't want to judge you. But that word was out there, and so that word became the measure of God's judgment, and he judged by his truth. But also his mercy was revealed, because when God clothed Adam and Eve with coats of skin, he was, in essence, revealing this amazing concept of mercy. And we'll spend several classes talking about mercy and how God has an answer for sin. You remember there's a lamb slain before the foundation of the earth, so he didn't have to compromise his law to bring redemption to man. We're going to close the class today by saying that our first introduction to God is that of God as creator of all. He chose to place this knowledge of himself as preeminent and foremost in our thoughts. That's how he started the Bible. He elected that this aspect of his being should be the principal and paramount thing that we must know about him. I believe it is the most important fact of all human knowledge. And although implications of God as creator are immense and multifaceted, we are constrained, at least especially in this class, we are constrained to recognize that his being cannot be comprehended outside of the context of his role as lawgiver. Well, that concludes our class for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to tune back in on the website next week as our next session of this amazing study on law and grace continues. God bless you.